Hello and welcome to Movie Night with Andy and Gabe. I'm Andy,
I'm Gabe.
and today I took the piss and said let's do a double feature. This is where I got Gabriel to watch two movies that he hadn't seen before. They are both smaller independent movies and they are radically different, but they're what I call stressful job simulators. That is Boiling Point and The Guilty. Um, Gabe, which one would you like to talk about first?
Well, I figure I'd talk about them in the order in which I watched them, so we'll start with Boiling Point. But before we do that, I do want to point out that you have had me watch very long movies the last couple of times that we've been doing this, and we finally get to a point where you could recommend to me a shorter movie, and then you put two of them together so they're as long as the ones that we've usually been doing. So thanks for that. Uh, anyway,
I'm a rascal.
yeah, so we can start with Boiling Point if you want.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, before we do, could you see why I put them together?
yes, I do. They are similar in that they both feature true to life depictions, one more than the other, but in some ways true to life depictions of a particular job, a day in the life of a particular job. So
Okay.
yeah, I totally get
Yeah.
that.
All right. So we'll start with Boiling Point. Boiling Point is a 2021 British film based on a 2019 short film with the same director and cast, and the movie follows one fucking awful night in a restaurant while the staff try to work with difficult customers and poor staff relations while being overbooked on a busy night. What did you think of Boiling Point?
Well, first of all, I didn't know that had been based on a short film. I'd like to see that if I can find it. Um, I so I'm gonna I'm gonna go off script here and sort of talk about both movies together for 1 second because there was one word that I had to describe both of these films, and well, actually two words. The first one was effective, and the second was compelling. They were both very effective, and they were very compelling. Boiling Point, I'm not even sure where to start. We could start with the fact that it was one long continuous shot. To me, that's a special effect. They did that in um, the Firefly movie right at the beginning, and I don't even know how they coordinate things like that. That's always amazing to me, and that was a whole movie that was just one long continuous shot. So that to me is amazing. I guess I'll start with the fact that I've said to you before, I'm not sure I ever said it on stream, but I've said to you many times, and I mean this really sincerely, that you can tell the basic moral character of a complete stranger if you know how they treat animals and how they treat service staff. Okay. Uh, this is kind of a microcosm of that. This shows why that's the case. This shows the kinds of things that you have to have empathy for when you're dealing with people in the service industry, because this really is what they go through. I've never worked in it myself because I would rather chew my own leg off than deal with anything like this. And it's funny, in every possible sense that's true. I don't ever want to own a business. Wouldn't ever want to work in a restaurant. I wouldn't ever want to deal with people. I wouldn't ever want to be in service. All of those things. Um, this movie sort of depicts why I wouldn't want to do any of those things. It also, I was really impressed with this. It also shows the dynamics of every single level of employment in a place like this, from ownership to management to frontline employees to peons would who are just there to get their little check that is so small they probably don't even need it and could do anything. And it depicted that those power dynamics really well, um, as well, if not better than it depicted the actual atmosphere of working in a restaurant. So that was really good. That was very effective. Um, the only problem with it, as you say, it depicts a sort of a day in the life of a really terrible day in the life of this restaurant. Um, the only problem with it that I could find was the ending.
A lot of people say that, and I've heard some opinions on the ending that I guess we'll get
Well,
to a bit later on.
sure.
Spoilers for both of these films. You should know this by now if you've been watching us. If you're new, we just spoil everything. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so if we're I was actually going to leave spoilers out because I actually want people to see this. I think it's actually important. But I guess I'll if we're giving a spoiler warning, I'll go ahead and put it in.
you've got a chance
Um
now. Go see it. It's not very long. If you're in
yeah.
Britain, you can find it on Netflix. And where did you watch it, Gabe?
Amazon Prime Video. It's $4.
All right, brilliant. Yeah.
Mhm. So, oh, I'm sorry. I tell a lie. It's not $4. I got a free trial. You had to get a free trial of this subscription service to Magnolia Films or something. Actually, I need to cancel that shit. I just realized that. But yeah. So you can if you're careful, you can watch it for free. So the only problem I had was the ending. Basically, the guy drops dead at the end, or presumably drops dead at the end, and it doesn't, and it just stops. Now, that's not exactly the problem I had with it. Uh, Roger Ebert really liked the movie There Will Be Blood, and so did I, by the way. That movie also just doesn't have an ending. That movie also just kind of stops. And Roger Ebert, in addressing that criticism of it, said, "Well, where would you have ended it?" And that's a good point. I thought that was a good point. There is no place you could have ended it, so you got to end it somewhere. The problem is, I felt that that ending should have tied in to something bigger that was going on in the film. Maybe I just missed this. It wasn't entirely clear to me from the beginning that he had a drug problem. That seemed to come out of nowhere. Even if I was vaguely aware of it from the start, the magnitude of that seemed to come out of nowhere to me. I felt that it should have been the actual stress of running the business that caused that. I felt like if they hadn't done a scene where he was doing drugs and then that was the cause of him collapsing, that if he just collapsed because of everything that was happening, I felt that would have been more uh, effective. I give it props for having the same "where would you have ended it" deal as There Will Be Blood. It doesn't diminish the film at all. I just felt it could have been done a little bit better.
I've heard from someone on Reddit, and I don't know if it's true or not because I'm not familiar with like the drug lingo, so to speak. But I've heard
Mm.
that the porter who shows up late, he actually bought heroin and not cocaine, and that Stephen Graham's character thinking it was cocaine because cocaine is yeah,
Oh,
and that is what killed him. So it was like a
that makes
continuation.
100% sense.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
because they said Henry, but I don't know if Henry is short for heroin, like a street name, or if it's
Mm,
like an eighth of like a gram of cocaine or something like that.
right.
I've heard it be said both ways, and I don't know what's true. If it was heroin that he snorted, then that would tie into the sort of themes of miscommunication and things like
Yeah,
that.
that's true. That's true. I
But
hadn't
I
put
but
that together.
but I am only playing devil's advocate. I don't know if that's true.
Mm.
But if it is, then I would say it would make sense and it
Yeah.
fits in.
Yeah, if that is the case, I that changes things for me. That does make sense because it would be like the fuck up with the nuts and
Yeah.
all that.
So Boiling Point is actually one take. We get a lot of films that are meant to resemble one take, like Birdman, for example. Birdman was shot to
Yeah.
appear as though it was one take, but it wasn't. It was clever editing and use of pans and zooms. This film was actually one take. They shot it in 4 takes, and they chose the third one, which they thought was the best overall. The process for making this film is like I was talking to my other half about it, and I came to the conclusion I don't think the director was on set for this, because I don't see how he could be, because the camera flies about in every different direction. I have to wonder if the director was just there for the rehearsals, got everything tight, and then just trusted the crew, because I don't see where you could have put him
Mm,
to direct
that
the
may
action,
be.
unless
Yeah,
he
that may be.
unless he himself was also like knew exactly when to like fucking run and get out of the shot, and he just did a banging job of it, which is also possible.
Mm.
But the thing I love about this film is this is the single most realistic, authentic depiction I've ever seen of the people that you meet in London in the 21st century. Everybody, from both the demographics to the demeanour, everyone in this movie looked and spoke and behaved exactly like someone that I have met just in the last year. Like, for example, the porter who stumbles in late.
Yeah.
I went to school with about 30 of him, right down to the very carefree, jovial, like the way he sort of sways as he walks, like that. That is like exactly the sort of person that I expect to be doing that job, and that is exactly how I expect him to sort of behave. Of like, well, it's such a stressful job, I might as well just be carefree and sort of lackadaisical, but it also kind of stresses everyone else out. And the reason for this, which I think the reason I think it is so authentic, is this film actually didn't have a script, not in the conventional sense. So this movie had a script full of stage directions and things that happen and problems that occur, and then the actors, through heavy rehearsal, improvised their dialogue and obviously their characters and their mannerisms.
Mm-hmm.
So the way they just shout over each other, that feels so real, because it actually, in a way, kind of is. They're
Yeah.
not trying to make dialogue fit the action. Sorry, they're not trying to make action fit dialogue. They're making dialogue fit action. So there is no script for dialogue. They are all just acting and behaving in character and speaking as you would speak in that situation. And the effect that it has was like, were it not for the heightened drama of some of what goes on, um, I could have been there. I could have been there on that day, not known that there was a camera filming somehow, and I would not have thought that I was on a film set. Put it that way.
Right.
It
Right.
was bang on, and that's actually what I wanted to ask you about, because you said something to the effect of like you kind of got that feeling and you couldn't really tell when characters were angry at each other, or something to that effect.
So, yeah. So you guys, like British people, let me try to figure out how to word this. There are forms of subtle communication that people have with other people when it comes to tone of voice and body language. And when you're using sarcasm, when you're angry, but you're not speaking as though you're angry, but the person infers that you're angry, that sort of thing. You guys do that differently than we do.
Right.
So yeah, so there were many scenes where there was a person who would have been talking to another person who was angry or resentful, but they were letting them know that in such a way that didn't sound like they were angry and resentful. I had to take note of when that was probably happening, because I couldn't immediately tell the way I would if somebody who was in my country was talking to me doing that, if that makes any sense. And this is coming from somebody. I grew up with British media, at comedies at least. Monty Python, Faulty Towers, later Absolutely Fabulous, and The Office, and Doctor Who, and just British media has been a part of my life for all of it. So I was already more adept than I think most people in this country would be to this sort of thing. And even I mean, this goes to how you're talking about how authentic it was. Even I had difficulty at times sort of parsing what the subtlety in communication was supposed to be.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. No, I get what you mean because British people are people say that the British are passive aggressive, but it's weird because it's like aggressive passive aggression, where British people um, British people will be like quite smarmy, like what you can think, but also they will also like just mow over you. Like the beginning of this film, we see Stephen Graham's character Andy. If you're not familiar with Stephen Graham, he is a very well respected actor in Britain, known for a lot of TV drama and a lot of movies over here. And he was in The Irishman. If you're a Scorsese fan, things like that. He's a good actor, and he comes in late for his own restaurant's opening, and he's clearly having problems. And as they come in, you have this fucking dick of a health inspector who is the exact sort of bloody person where like when I say aggressive passive aggression, it's like this health inspector, he cannot say anything in a way that is not deliberately backhanded. So like when he goes up to the fridge and he asks what I think it was the fridge or the freezer, and he asks what degrees they're kept at, and the sous chef, she says it's at regulation 8 degrees, and he goes, oh, so it's at 8 degrees, and he goes, yeah, you know, you could really keep it down a little bit, like a little bit lower because of the, and she goes, but it is regulation. It's like, yeah, it's regulation, but if you could just go like, and she was like, but it is regulation, so what is the bee in your bonnet here? We have met regulation, move on. And because of just little oversights, really, like the new chef who is from France, she's washing her hands in the same sink that they prepare the food in, which is a no-no. And there's little things of like cross-contamination, stuff like that. So they go down from a 5-star to a 3-star on their health inspection. And Andy, the head chef, he sort of comes in and he starts off talking, and then he just kind of flips. And I wondered what you would make of that scene in particular, because I thought that was like so real, the way he goes like, you can't wash your hands in that space, and the sous chef is going, no, but she's young, like she's new, like it's her first week here, and he's like, it's not her first week in a fucking kitchen though, is it? She should know. Like, you get what I mean?
I do see. Now, this is the interesting. I had no idea that the health inspector was supposed to have been rude. That totally eluded me. That's a perfect example of what I mean when I say that there's that different way of communicating. There was a translation error there. I had absolutely no idea that he was supposed to have been rude, and I had absolutely no idea that the person he was talking to was, what would you say, sort of snapping back at him.
Yeah, she was irritated with him. She
couldn't tell.
Him, yeah,
That's
she wanted him
so
to fucking
interesting.
go. Yeah, she just wanted him gone because they had to open up. That's why she was going like, but it is regulation. We have met regulation. Yeah.
Yeah, see, I thought she... Yeah, I couldn't tell if she was confused. Yeah, that's really interesting. I like stuff like that. Um, and the yeah, so a lot of that emotional subtlety, I think was a little bit lost on me. It was something that I had to sort of deliberately follow. Um,
So let's talk about the main character. I got a
uh-huh,
question for you.
sure.
Do you like him, and do you think you could work with him?
So you're talking about the owner,
Yeah,
the head chef
yeah,
guy.
man on the poster.
I do like him, and I do think I could work for and with him. The person who I could not work for or with is his much more competent assistant. Um, yeah. So this is going to be interesting because it gets into sort of personal, how we relate to people personally. So yes and yes. I would, yeah, that's the only way I can answer that question. Yes, I do like him, and I do think I could work for him. What about you?
I think I could get on with him, but I think the second he would start raising his voice with me, it would escalate into an actual argument.
Mm.
Because my demeanor, the character that I relate to the most is Freeman, who is the fellow with the big beard.
Okay.
And you know, like how every fucking time the head chef goes off on one, or like, why isn't this been done? Why isn't this that? The Freeman immediately just calls him and goes, because you haven't fucking done it. Because it was your job, it was your responsibility. You haven't fucking done it, and now you're blaming it on us. You're the head chef. Get your shit together.
Right.
Um, I relate to him a lot in that, like, I felt like people consistently um, talk down to him and consistently act like he's the one with the attitude problem, and he's not.
Hmm.
He isn't.
Yeah.
I do not think he is the issue in any of the scenes in which he is depicted as like being an issue. Like when
Right.
they don't have the proper meat because it wasn't prepared properly, and the head chef goes, "Well, I've apologized. I've already apologized. What's your fucking problem?" And there was
Hmm.
no problem. He's just still annoyed because he didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. He's just still annoyed. And
Yeah.
then like say the issue with the lamb and things like that, where he's like, you know what, I'm just gonna fucking go over there, and people are like, oh, you're being like unreasonable, and people act like he is the problem, but he does not instigate any of the issues. He is just having to deal with all of their shit.
Hmm.
And first of all, there's like, how many chefs are there's five in the front preparing meat, and there's two bakers in the back, like, and
Yeah.
it's a really busy day. That's not a lot of people, not to my eyes
Right.
at least.
Right.
Um, but this film is such a great cross section of every kind of like person that you'll meet, because the one who I could not stand is the head of staff, the blonde lady,
Yeah.
with that the only way to be authoritative is for me to act like I'm a smarmy secondary school teacher and talk to everyone like they're children. And she's like, oh, language, you're swearing. And he's like, I've burnt my fucking hand. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
um, but yeah,
I see. I couldn't tell who was in the right in that scene. That's so funny.
I
That's
mean,
so interesting.
I'm I think it's completely reasonable that you swear and go fuck when you've burnt your hand. When she
Yeah.
says to Freeman at the beginning of the film, tone your language down, bring it down, please. That's fair enough. You're at work in a restaurant, quite a fancy restaurant as well.
Hmm.
Um, don't be swearing like a sailor. I understand that chefs swear a lot, but their kitchen is in the front where they can be seen, and
Right.
the customers can see them preparing the food. They're not in the back. So that, I think, is fair enough. I think she comes across like a smug arsehole when she's saying, "Can you bring the language down?" But when Andy burns his hand, like that's a reaction. He just burnt his hand. You swear,
Right.
like,
It's instinctive.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Something I thought this film was really good at was planting and payoff, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The second that girl walks in and reveals she has a nut allergy, I start signing her death warrant. I'm getting
Yeah,
her
I
paper.
did too.
Yeah, I'm getting her paperwork in order.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
so the PlayStation goes to your little brother, the jewelry
Right,
goes to your mum, the house is going to be auctioned. Like, I'm just
right.
like, okay, she's fucking going down, isn't she? Um,
Yeah,
because
I
obviously you
gotta
don't
tell you.
like. I was
Uh-huh.
sorry, I was going to say on one hand you could be like, oh, it's very obvious foreshadowing, but the thing is that if you go into a restaurant, you don't not say that you have a nut allergy. So like, of course,
Right.
she would say, "I've got a nut allergy." So like if in order for you to have a nut allergy in a fucking fancy restaurant, if unless you're an idiot and just didn't mention it, like you would have had to have said, "I've got a nut allergy," and then they would have had to have fucked up. You know?
Right.
Sorry, carry on.
Well, no, well, the only thing I was gonna say was I knew somebody was gonna die in this movie. I knew somebody was gonna die, pretty much from frame one.
It's just a vibe,
Um,
isn't it? Because you feel like you're
yeah,
dying the whole time you watch it. Like this film's a
right,
nightmare.
right. Um, so yeah, it was, I recommend it to anybody. It was a very efficient piece of work.
Absolutely, absolutely. I like the fact that it's one take does not affect the quality of the cinematography. There's still beautiful shots and framing. Everyone is like where they
Hmm.
need to be.
Yep.
Um, the um, the film needs to be one take as well. I think because I think if you had cuts, it would break up the action. The next film we're going to talk about has lots of cuts and lots of editing, and
Yeah.
this one, I mean, I guess they only really would have had a sound editor for this, because you just press
Yeah,
play on Sony Vegas. Um,
for sure, for sure.
imagine if they used Sony Vegas, but because you have no escape from the action, you have to follow everyone around these little vignettes of like those the first people that come in, the bald guy, the first customers with the fucking wine and the lamb, and he's like
Mm.
lamb, the pink. Like the customers are so irritating. That guy is just an arsehole. But like
Mm.
the ones that really get me, because that guy, like, he's just a cunt. Okay, like he'll be gone. He'll be gone. But the ones that really annoy me are when they go, "We don't understand this menu. It's a bit too fancy for us." In which case,
Yeah.
just you look at the menu that's in the bloody window, and then they ask for steak and chips, and then they're like, well, how do you have your steak? Which she shouldn't be doing. She shouldn't be telling them. They should be saying only what's on the menu. But when they go like,
Right.
how do you have your steak? Is that I'll just cremate it. So not only does he want them to go out of their way to make a steak that is not on the menu, but he wants it fucking burnt black. And
Let me correct your language there. He wants it wrong.
yeah, yeah,
He wants it wrong.
and then I think the funniest part of that though is when the head chef goes to the French woman, right, do some spuds, and she's like, what? She just fucking loves like, yeah, do some spuds, and she obviously does not know what that means, and the bloke next to her is just like, yeah, it's like just fritters, like he knows what the French call it. She's just
Yeah.
there. Um,
See, I didn't get that either. That's really funny.
yeah, like, would you say he was? How reasonable would you say he is? Because you seem to have more of an issue with his right hand man, and I thought she was personally, I thought she was the more reasonable of
Oh,
them.
she was the only thing holding that together. And I know I have seen that. I know exactly what that dynamic is, and that's why she was as what's the word you would say? aggressive isn't the word I'm looking for. That's why she was as direct as she was, because
Yeah.
she was the only person holding it together and she didn't have anybody helping her basically hold everything together. I totally get why she was the way she was. I didn't have an issue with her. I couldn't work for somebody like that. Uh, but no, the reason, no, that was absolutely uh perfectly depicted.
Yeah, I mean, the
Uh
way she just shouts over that other one, where eventually she's just like, "Do you know how lamb is cooked? Do you know how lamb is cooked?" Because one of the
right.
things that happens in this film is that the waiting staff don't really know what's on the menu and how things are meant to be cooked because they haven't been taught properly, which means the chefs are getting shit, and obviously she just lays into this other woman, um, and that was very satisfying for me. But like,
Mhm.
I felt like I didn't feel like, apart from that one customer, that the bald guy, I didn't feel like anyone was an out and out asshole. Like the blonde woman was a snooty cow, and I didn't like her. But
Yeah.
like, you get people like that. Whereas like Andy comes in and he does a really fucking holler at the two of them. But once he calms his shit, he goes up to the two that he yells at and he apologizes and he goes, I am sorry. And then he's showing the other one how to shell the oysters, and you're like, oh, he's a teacher as well. Like he's like, I felt like I I could not deal with him, but
Mm.
from a distance, like from a distance, I could sort of appreciate of like, right, he just doesn't have his shit together. But I don't think this is a
Right.
bad guy. I don't think that this is because some people said this was a good depiction of a toxic work environment, and I don't know that I would go that far. It's a really bad day, but I didn't feel like he was toxic. It felt like he was under a lot of stress and took it out maybe when he shouldn't have. But like he goes out of his way to apologize. He doesn't have to. He goes out of his way to he's very he gives praise. He gives praise like to
Hmm.
the young boy in the back who's baking, and he takes like extra like mouthfuls of the food, and he's got, you got a lot of talent, like you're really good, like
Yeah.
like
Yeah. 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 Yeah, no, for sure. I don't think this was a toxic work environment. I think this is the kind of environment that you're going to work in when you work in a place like that. And no, I didn't think that there was anybody. Uh, Help me out here. Was the one guy? I don't know names and I can't think of descriptions. The guy that was dealing with the one waitress, was anybody in this supposed to have been like kind of racist? Was that something that they were trying to show?
I imagine that maybe they were trying to show sort of like some passive aggressive racism. I would say quite possibly, yeah.
Yeah, the only reason I got that was because I noticed that like I think the setup was that he started they it started out with a different waitress who wasn't
Yeah,
black, and then he's like, where's so and so, and then he had a problem with her, and I thought maybe they might have been implying that he
I could
was
believe it. I could believe it because
racist.
obviously,
Yeah.
because in that situation as well, you're not going to go like, what, they gave me a black
Yeah, of
waitress,
course nobody's gonna say
yeah, no
that.
one's going
Yeah.
to say that. So like,
Yeah.
I could believe that they were trying to
Yeah.
depict some racism there. That's Boiling Point, really. What do you think of Boiling Point?
I thought it was very good. I thought it was very um efficient. I thought it was a very competent, I keep skipping over the word I'm looking for, effective movie. If you want to know what the atmosphere is like working in a restaurant, I don't think there's been a better film depiction of that.
No, and I doubt there will ever be another one
Yeah.
quite as good as this. Like, other films that have been set in kitchens, they're not like an entire fucking day in the kitchen because this film all plays out in real time. But
Right.
it's obviously the reason we're doing two today instead of one is that because both of these films are shorter, um, there's not always as much to say, but also because this is a film, even though the film itself is very dense, very layered, and there's so much to it, it's one of those films where there aren't necessarily themes and ideas that I think you can necessarily just like pull out and talk for ages about, like you would with, say, Mulholland Drive, or even like what we
Sure.
did with Avatar. Like I think this is a film that's very like, you experience it and you get it, and I think that you kind of say all you need to say in this 30-minute span that we have done. I think it's
Yeah.
outstanding, and this was the feature length debut of Philip Baratini as well. This was his first movie.
It was a good one.
Yeah, yeah. So our second film is kind of the opposite, yet also is kind of the same. It is another stressful, bad day in a job where you never once leave the workspace. Boiling Point, you
Yeah.
never leave the restaurant. The Guilty, you never leave this calling station. But
Yeah.
this is a slower paced, methodical drama, and it's still tense, but the atmosphere is so different. Yeah, I think the films are tackling in some ways quite similar ideas. So, The Guilty is a movie that is set all in a police call station, and it is a bad day in the life of a police officer who is doing the what we would say a 999 call, or what Gabe would say a 911 call. I can't remember what the emergency service number is in
I think it was
in
one
Denmark.
one two. I think it was
112.
112. I think so.
Yeah, this is a Danish film. This is our first foreign language film we've done. I never expected it to be this. I honestly thought it would be Pan's Labyrinth, but, but here we are with The Guilty.
Yeah.
So it is
Hell
him,
yeah.
him answering calls and being like, 112, what is your emergency? And it follows a bad work day in his life. What do you make of The Guilty?
Well, I'm going with a sort of meta look at how this movie was made, or the inspiration for it. I was familiar with the phone call that the writer or the director, whichever one was inspired by it. The film was actually inspired by a YouTube video of a woman who had called 911, and my understanding is that it's this one. There's actually several instances like this. A woman calls emergency services and says some nonsense. Like they'll say, "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" And the woman will say like, "Oh, hi honey, I'm just out for a drive," or something. And in one of the ones that I was really familiar with, the woman started ordering a pizza. And in every one of these instances that I've ever heard, of which there have been many, the 911 or the emergency operator immediately thinks it's a prank, and then they showed that in this movie too. And they're like, "Okay, do you have an emergency?" "Oh yeah, the scenery's really nice. We're out here on whatever." And it's like, "Okay, I'm hanging up." Eventually, they get the message that the person is trying to signal to them that they're in trouble, but they're with an abductor and they can't say it. In the one that I was familiar with, the one started ordering a pizza. The operator thought it was a prank. Eventually, they were like, "Hey, is there somebody there with you?" "Mm-hmm." "Have you been abducted?" "Mm-hmm." And they're like, and you're like, "Oh shit." So, as I say, there are several YouTube videos of these kinds of calls, and the writer or director or whoever it was listened to that and thought, wouldn't this be a good premise for a movie? And they specifically said, we could really explore what you can do with just sound, with just audio going on the phone. And what a good inspiration. They were absolutely right. It did make for a great movie. It did make for a great exploration of what you can do with sound, and the way that you can use space and lighting and furniture and space and just everything about this movie worked for what they were going for, worked for that inspiration. I felt like they hit. If you were gonna make a movie based on a call like that, I don't think you could have done it better. Um, and unlike Boiling Point, this was also kind of a morality play. Again, spoilers. There is a this woman. She calls emergency services. She's been abducted. She signals that in just the way that I described. And this operator becomes obsessed with tracking this woman down and saving her ostensibly from her abductor. He gets more and more information as the film goes along. He learns that the man who has abducted this woman went to her home, it was her ex-husband. They've been separated. They have 2 children, a little girl and an infant. The man had apparently gone there and yelled and screamed and taken a knife and taken the woman. The children are now home alone, the little girl and the little baby. Throughout the course of the movie, he discovers that the baby has been murdered in a very grisly manner, that the baby's been cut open and died. Now he knows the father has a knife, and he puts 2 and 2 together. He ends up making several phone calls to the man, the father, and says, "You're a piece of shit, you're gonna burn in hell, you deserve to be executed, you killed this little baby." There comes a point, sort of midway through the movie, where he realizes that you should not act when you don't have all the facts, because what actually happened, mega spoilers, was the mom is a deeply disturbed, deeply troubled person who thought that there were snakes inside of her baby, and she cut the baby open. That's why he was yelling and screaming and got her out of there, and he was taking her to a mental institution. So the entire thing throughout the course of this movie, the person is also discussing, the officer, the emergency services guy, is also discussing a court case that he has coming up. We come to find out that he shot somebody in the line of duty. And by the end of the film, this woman who killed her child is on a bridge. He's on the phone with her. He's trying to talk her down. She admits to herself and to this officer that she killed her child. And she's going to jump. And he, reciprocating her confession, gives his own confession that the person he killed in the line of duty, he killed basically in cold blood because he thought the person deserved to die. There's a symbolism here. The woman thought there were snakes inside of her child. When the officer describes shooting this guy, he said, I was trying to remove something from the world. And she said, was it snakes? And he says, yes, it was snakes. I thought that was really good imagery. They both had this perception of evil that they tried to stop in the wrong way. He talks her down. She's off the bridge. He redeems himself, at least in that sense. And that's kind of where the movie stops. So it's a morality play in addition to all the other things that we described. I guess I'll end my comments by saying, look what you can do with a tiny little space. 13 days of shooting, I think it was. Audio, a really good concept, a really good script, a really, really good cast, and just lighting and mood and atmosphere. This was drama, tragedy, and horror. When we learned that the little baby has been cut open by the operator's on the phone with an officer who goes to the house to check on the kids. He goes in and says, he tells the guy on the phone, he tells the officer, go find the little baby. And you hear the officer and they're looking around for him. And he finds him and he kind of gasps and he says, the baby's dead. And he's like, no, go back in there and look at him. check to see if he's breathing. He says, "You don't understand. He's cut open," and he describes this scene. That is one of the most graphic, horrific things that I've ever experienced in a movie. You don't see anything because what you can do in your mind is so much more grisly than if they had actually put a prop in that scene. That's what this movie does, and it does it very, very well. Over to you.
Yeah, it's everything that you said. It's a horror film, it's a thriller, it's a crime drama, it's a character study, and it does all of this just incredibly. The blocking of this film is he starts at a desk, he goes back into a private room, and then he goes back out into the main room
To give his confession, yeah.
and that's it. That's all the movement he does. But the lighting and the
Right.
way they use actual, like, what you would call practical lighting, which is practical lighting. It would be like, for example, when he is lit up by the computer, that would be considered a practical. And that's something that is in the scene, and it just uses the actual light of the scene to light the cameras. And then you have your lighting, your proper, like, studio lights and things like that. I think Boiling Point was all practical lights as well. I don't know if this was, or if this did use artificial light. But when the computers have light. That sounds so dumb. Like a pole next to the monitor with a light that's red, just so that someone knows if they're on a call or not. I assume if you see someone's on a call, you don't interrupt them. And one of them is red. And when he has one of those horrible, grisly realizations, he smashes the shit out of that office, and the only thing that's still running is the red light, and he is just bathed in that red light. And it's brilliant. It's atmospheric. But
the symbolism
real.
behind that,
yeah,
it's real. The symbolism behind that too, because that was, blood, and that light being on was his obsession, and now he's I can't even. I could talk for 2 hours about that kind of stuff that was in that movie, but just absolutely excellent.
Yeah, I mean, because I know a lot of police officers. I know 4 police officers, in fact. And the thing is that they see grisly, horrible shit every day, and the only way you can deal with seeing what they see is the knowledge that it's like, it's the job, and when the job is done, I go home to my family, I watch TV, I make dinner, and I live a normal life. And I try to leave work at work. Now, obviously, when you have seen what they have seen, that's a very hard thing to do. One of the police officers I know, which I can't go into specific details for obvious reasons, but they were involved in the rescue of a child from a child abductor. And that stayed with them to the point where they changed the area of police work they did to go into that specific field of trying to rescue children from sex abuse. And the thing is, what people don't tell you is when you sign up to be a police officer in this country, and I don't know what it's like in America, but I imagine Denmark is more like that. You have to watch. I'm trying to find a way to. You have to watch indecent images and video of various crimes, including murder, including the abuse of children, like the materials that you have to watch, and you have to be desensitized to it to the point where you can go out and see that in real life and be able to do your job.
Yeah.
And the thing you have to do is you have to fucking go home, which is what this guy doesn't do. he is so he clearly wants to atone for what he has done. So he
Yeah.
gets personally involved with this to try and make sure this woman is rescued, and to a degree you can see that as noble. But he keeps fucking it up.
Yeah, big
And that's the
time.
thing. It's like, and it's like you want to be on his side, but at the same time, because it is a job, and because you have your own life that you have to look after, and there is a system that is supposed to protect people, it's like, dude, go the fuck home.
Yeah.
And obviously you would be losing sleep over, like, you're gonna wonder, well, what if I didn't go home that day? What if I stayed and I did this? If I'd done this differently, would I have saved a life? If I'd done this differently, would this person
Right.
not have died? You know, all of this stuff. And you just have to go home
Right.
because the job can drive you insane. And this shows the person. This film shows the
Right.
person and the individual of, like, this guy needs to just fucking go home, get up tomorrow, go to court, fucking deal with whatever may
And
be.
to say a little bit more about that, I have been in for completely different purposes having to do with debates on the internet and such. I've been researching a lot about trauma, and there is no way to expose yourself to what these people are exposed to without trauma. There really is no way to do it. There are ways that you can mitigate it, and exactly as you said, contextualize it in a professional, but it's going to traumatize you, and that's a very difficult problem.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there's something that I have said before when people, like, not even necessarily just police, but people who act in an official capacity have maybe done something that they shouldn't have done. Not anything criminal, but just something that would be like, ah, that was against regulation. I shouldn't have done that, sort of thing.
Hmm.
And what I'd say is, like, well, at a certain point, you've got to be a human being as
Yeah, of
well.
course.
Like, for
Yeah.
example, like um, a a social worker is not necessarily allowed to hug a crying child because it could be considered inappropriate. But if you've got an
Right.
absolutely, like, hysterical child who's, crying their eyes out because, whatever it is that they've just been through, at a certain point, like, someone might just choose to be a human being and try and,
Exercise some discretion. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Hmm.
and I think that's what this character is trying to do, or at the very least is telling himself that he's doing. But I think
Yeah.
that his whole involvement is about him
Right.
and his shit and how he wants to try and um, atone. I want to say, I think
Yeah.
it's that he he has taken a life and how he desperately wants to save a life, and
Hmm.
and what a fucking performance from this actor as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
like, both of these movies have fantastic, incredible acting. I can sing the praises of it all day, but Stephen Graham does an amazing job in Boiling Point. He is an incredible actor, but he also has the luxury of having a large cast to bounce off of. Whereas Jacob Sedgren in this movie, apart from a couple lines where he has a physical person in the room with him, he has to do a lot of this on his own. I don't know if he could actually hear the other actors at all. Like, you
Mm.
said before in our very first episode when we did Buffalo 66, you said that
Hmm.
you feel a good judge of how good an actor someone is how they do a scene on the phone.
On the phone, yeah.
Yeah, well, Jacob Sedgren heard you, I guess. Um,
The whole thing, yes.
yeah, and he
Yeah.
is yeah, and he is fully there. He is very
Hmm.
he's very believable to me because he believes, like, he looks to me like the sort of person you would see on this job. Like, There's a US remake that came out on Netflix, I think this year or last year, one of the two. But that stars Jake Gyllenhaal, and Jake Gyllenhaal is obviously this fantastic actor. Everyone has sung his praises, and rightly so. And I just kind of see Jake Gyllenhaal. Um,
Yeah.
that remake feels like a movie.
Yeah.
It feels like a movie. There are a couple outside shots which, sure, let's take what was interesting about this one and like do away with it sort
And
of thing.
get rid of it. Yeah.
This to me, it did feel like a movie. It when compared to Boiling Point, which practically felt real, but this felt very authentic, and it felt to me quite true to life, or at least as true to life as something this high stakes and tense could be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um there so uh, this is going to sound strange, but it'll make sense when I say it. Um on Star Trek, the people who played the Klingons, a few of them were asked like how uh how do you get into the character of a Klingon? How do you play a Klingon? How do you know what a Klingon's all about and whatnot? And one of the guys very famously answered that basically it's all the makeup. Once you're in that makeup, when you look at yourself in the mirror, you know who this guy is, basically. And I feel like in a film like this, if when you're when you're in when you're on this set and you have this script, that's probably 99% of it right there. When you have that little space where it's basically you and the camera, you really have a chance to put yourself in this headspace of what you would be thinking and feeling if this were really happening to you. So I feel like the environment really helped there
You just have to
too.
let yourself believe at that point.
Yes, yeah, exactly. You have to just start behaving as you would if this were happening.
So I guess we should talk about why I decided to bother you with the first ever double feature. Not the first double feature I've ever planned, but the
Mhm.
first one that we've actually done at this point, because I thought that these were two films that they were radically different and yet so similar. Like the same kind of concepts are being explored, yet they couldn't be more different.
Yeah,
Can you see why I kind of thought of these could be like unofficial companion pieces to one another? Good side by
definitely,
side viewing.
definitely. The phrase "true to life" is very accurate. Um, and the tone of both movies was very similar. Yeah, I definitely see how they can relate to one another.
So, how would you say for your experience as a viewer? And obviously, this is not to say that one is better than the other. They're both very good movies, and they're very different. What would you say as the viewer? Which one would you say resonated more with you, if one did resonate more with you at all?
I think because The Guilty did have that sort of morality play element to it, whereas Boiling Point was more like,
A fresh nightmare.
yeah, it was more like a very realistic day in the life of just, you know, maybe a not quite so average day at a restaurant or whatever. I think I took very different things for them to the point where I can't really say I couldn't really compare one to the other in terms of quality like that. I think they both did exactly what they set out to do, exactly as well.
Mm.
So, yeah, I'm not sure that I could
I,
compare them like that. Hmm.
I would say, given how authentic to London, and to be fair, the main character is not a Londoner, but like how authentic Boiling Point is to like the kind of people. Were these both effectively foreign language films to you?
So kind of, I didn't understand. So it's interesting that it was jarring to hear somebody talk about the Americans. You don't hear that here, obviously, because nobody where you are is not going to be American here. And over there, there's lots of different people. For I would imagine people from different countries come and visit there all the time. So that was kind of interesting. There were definitely, what would you say? Different idioms that I'm not totally familiar with. And again, that's even speaking as a person who grew up with sort of British media, even that, like, this is on a different level. So there's definitely a cultural barrier with that one, and certainly a language, certainly a language barrier with the other one.
Did you like so? How easy was it for you to understand Stephen Graham in the lead role for Boiling Point? Because he's a Scouse in that film. He's a Scouser, so he has because the other character, say like the French chef, she has to go. She's like, you're very quick and your accent. I don't always understand what you are saying to me. And he goes, yeah, Scouse in it, yeah, sort of thing. But how well could you say you understood him? Because I assume you're not
Okay, so
exposed to that dialect very often at all.
well, so here's the thing. If a person from Scotland, a person from Ireland, a person from Wales, and a person from England all came over here and were all speaking at the same time, we would just say they all had British accents. And a person from Australia, for that matter. Um, it, we do not distinguish between different English accents, so it all just sounds like a British accent to me, like different.
That's very interesting because they're so different.
Hold on one second.
Yep.
What was that? Oh, Chantel thinks most people will be able to tell the difference between a Scottish and a British accent. That may be, but in my experience, I
Technically, a
have to
Scottish accent is a British accent.
right
But I know that you guys,
English.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
guys
yeah.
say
I
British when you mean English. Yeah.
yes, definitely, we definitely do.
How did you find the subtitles for The Guilty? Because I remember us talking a long time ago, before we ever did anything like this, that you were not too keen on watching films that were subtitled. Not in like an ignorant way, but just like you weren't. You found that it took you out of the experience a bit. Like it did. It doesn't sound like it did for you this time.
It didn't take me out of the experience. No, I have a very particular problem these days with subtitles in that my dyslexia is getting worse, and I didn't even know that was possible, but it is actually getting worse. It's difficult for me
You're getting
to do
old.
that. Yeah, yeah, I think so, or getting like more neurologically fucked. But um yeah, I think because the dialogue was so uh punchy and intermittent, it didn't really, I didn't have to sit there and try the, I don't think there was ever more than a short sentence being said at one time, so that helped. That I was getting the because that movie was so tone oriented that I could kind of tell the gist of what was going on even if I didn't read everything. So that helped.
Okay, so we've come past the hour now. Ooh.
Mm.
What are your closing thoughts on Boiling Point and The Guilty, or as I have come to call them, stressful job simulators?
Ancestral job simulators. I think so. My final thoughts are I think that's a very apt description of both of these movies, and I can't say anything more than I did. I felt like I was overly detailed talking about The Guilty. Um, I just hope people watch them. I just hope people take the time and see them. My life is that much better for having seen both of these movies.
Oh, fantastic! I mean, I would say for the two, I think they are two just masterfully crafted films. I think they both tell an interesting story, even though you could argue that in some ways Boiling Point doesn't tell a conventional story. There's still a story there being told,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I think they do the same kind of thing in such radically different ways, and it's just like these this for me is the joy of smaller smaller cinema. I don't want to go like in indie film because I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like how it
Right.
sounds or how it feels to say. But like,
Yeah.
but this is what I really like with low budget, more like private, privately made films. I would
Hmm.
say like, um, these films would not have been made in like a big Hollywood setting. Or in the case of The Guilty, it got a remake, and the remake doesn't really get it, as is usually the case. Um,
Hmm.
but these films, I think, are, are something that could only really happen outside of like the Hollywood sort of studio system. Like Britain has had this long history of kitchen sink realism and depicting normal everyday people and the dramas that happen around the home. And in America, I think films like that are often like more like Oscar baity kind of things. But this is just kind of how a lot of successful British independent film has just been. And I think these are two films that, for me, really show the joy of what you can do with just creative people who have just an idea and a clear vision for how to communicate that idea. There's no frills. There's no like added nonsense. They're just stripped back, well-oiled machines that I think tell really tense, engaging stories, which is why I wanted to talk about both of them today.
Yeah, you know what? We should sit down and do an addendum to this because I have a lot to say about the Hollywood system and how even as recently as the 90s, it used to be that you could make a movie about anything.
Yeah,
And that's
absolutely.
no longer the case in the Hollywood system, and why that happened and why it's bad and why movies like this are exactly the kind of things that you should be able to make alongside, summer oriented blockbusters and whatnot. So that would be a good conversation.
Well, if you want to hear two grumpy people rant about exactly that, if you go on the channel now, you should find the addendum to this. Um, that was Boiling Point and The Guilty. Next time, we're doing a musical. We're going to do A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, which was Gabe's pick for next week.
I can't wait. It is one of my. It's right there next to Mad Mad World.